Thank you all for being here, especially on our first real snow, I guess, in Denver on a Friday morning, a cold Friday morning. My name is Paul Teske. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at CU Denver. And as you maybe saw a minute ago when the slides were going by, this is the 50th anniversary of both the School of Public Affairs and also CU Denver as a university. And so we're this year, our First Friday series, as some of the regulars in the room know, is devoted to looking at the long scape of public policy issues today, criminal justice, and not necessarily literally 50 years ago, because some of the panelists probably weren't born 50 years ago, but and I was, but I wasn't in Colorado. So we want to look at big issues, big picture changes in the criminal justice system and in crime prevention and policing and corrections and parole and all the kinds of issues. And we have an amazing panel here this morning, so we want to get right to it. I do want to do some thank yous and other logistics. So first of all, thank you to our amazing caterer, Pam from Goddess Caterers, a woman-owned small business. Wonderful burritos and potatoes and other things. I should say too, we'll be done at 10 o'clock, but we're not kicked out of the room. So if you want to talk with each other, if there's more food, if some of the panelists can stay, please continue to do that. There's restrooms behind me. And as you may have seen on the slides as well, we do a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the native tribes on whose land we exist. And also with the 50th anniversary, we remember that the Auraria campus was an urban renewal project that displaced a lot of Latino families that were living on this, close by on this land that we also are doing these events on. And as some of you know too, the university has been very involved with the 9th Street House Project and trying to make that a site that remembers what was here before the university. So 50 years of the university, but lots of things that happened before we were here. I want to thank, in addition, our SPA people that helped put this together, Tula Wellbrook, Dee Dee Flynn, Joan Fishburne, who was outside, Katie Imhoff, and others who are here. So thank you for that. I also am very delighted that I know he has a busy schedule and will need to run, but our provost, Constancio Nakuma, is here in the front row. And so we're delighted to see you, Constancio. Thanks for coming. I want to quickly check, do we have any alums of the School of Public Affairs in the room? We do? Awesome. Thank you for being here. Students, current criminal justice and other students, thank you for being here. Everything we do is hopefully meant to help you and help your knowledge and training on these issues as you become future leaders and help improve and change our world, hopefully. So thank you. I guess also, if you're a regular at these series, next month, December, we're focusing on 50 years of nonprofits in Colorado and how that landscape has changed. And we have a schedule for the spring of looking at public finance and education and other topics and how they've changed over this 50-year period. So with that, well, I should also note, we do, you may have been able to pick up a 5x7 card if you want to write down a question around 9:30, 9:40. We'll collect those if you can pass them to the edge and bring them up to the moderator to focus on your questions. We also have, I want to welcome our Zoom audience. We have a number of people checking in online and listening and watching. We do record this as well if there are others who want to watch it later. So thank you for being with us as well. So with that, I will introduce our moderator, who will introduce our panel and get started. Our moderator is Dr. Mary Dodge. Mary has been with the School of Public Affairs for, I think, just over 25 years. And from assistant professor to full professor, and has an undergraduate degree from University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and a PhD from University of California, Irvine, which is one of the leading criminology and criminal justice programs in the country. Mary has written many books on criminal justice, many articles, has been in the news. One of her specialties is white collar crime, and but she's looked at a number of other areas, and she helped us put together this panel along with Sheila Huss. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, Dr. Mary Dodge.
I am so pleased to be here, and I did not really realize it was 25 years or more. It feels as though yesterday I started this job, and I'm still as excited about it as you can imagine. I'm particularly excited about today. We have a panel of experts that I don't know who else I would pick for this panel, and just as brief introductions, because of course they're I could spend the whole time introducing there and giving accolades to our panel, but I'm going to start right here with Justice Carlos Samour. We are so pleased to have someone from the Colorado Supreme Court. It's unusual, and I feel honored that he's here. He has been on the court for, I lost my note. 4 years, yes, that's right, and was a district, thank you, was a district court justice or judge in the 18th Judicial for many, many years, has also acted as prosecutor, so has vast experience in the law. And I have, just to give everyone a heads up, it's hard for me not to call Carlos Justice Samour. That's what I would normally do. We've talked about it. And so we like the panel to be a little bit more informal so we can talk and feel that we're open. So I am going to take the opportunity to call everyone by their first name, which we're okay with. And then next to just Carlos, I almost said Justice Samour, it's just habit. Can't help it. We have Elise Schmelzer from the Denver Post. So here is maybe our odd person out. I don't know, but I think that this is good. She's wonderful. She writes for public safety and she writes on crime. The last time we talked, she had done an incredible analysis of trends in crime in Colorado and Denver. Am I correct there, Elise? Yep. Thank you. So we're really pleased to have her. Oh, how did we end up here? Okay, good. Then we have Armando Saldate, who is impressive. We could call him Director Saldate. We'll call him Armando. He is the Executive Director of the Public Safety for the City and County of Denver. This position is appointed by the mayor, I believe I'm correct. Yep. Yes, thank you. And it is, as I was reading about everyone last night, I was amazed at the responsibilities here, including Denver Police Department, the Fire Department, 911, the sheriffs, Denver Sheriff, Community Corrections, Public Safety Youth Programs, Gang Reduction Initiatives, and Public Safety Cadet Program, which is a great program, paying tuition for some of our students, in fact, to go to school here. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it. At the end, I can barely see, but there you are. Thank you so much. Is Jonathan McMillan, who also, to his credit, if you have time, I highly recommend getting on his website. It is amazing what he has done. And he is also, and he can correct me if I'm wrong on his title, but now there's a Office for Gun Violence Prevention, and yes, you are the director. Correct. Yes, of course. So he, on his website, he is also the founder of Be Better Than Average, a consulting company. He does motivational speaking. He can speak to so many different topics, particularly when we look at the youth engagement. So this is our panel, and instead of me talking, we will just start some questions. I'd like to open this up with a quick, let's get to know everyone, 3 to 5 minute question that will allow everyone time to kind of give their positions. And of course, they've had the questions in advance, not much in advance since I was busy, but I'd like to ask, what represents the most significant trend or change that we see in your area of specialty? Whether it's legal change, it's of course criminal justice, and it's journalism. So I'm going to start with Carlos, and then we'll just go down the row for the panel.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, so thank you for having me. I would say that maybe for me, the biggest trend that I've seen in the time that I've been involved in criminal law has perhaps been the attitude toward drug crimes. I think whereas in the past, You've heard of the war on drugs, and a lot of people getting sentenced to prison for drug crimes. I think that there has been an evolution, and I think some recent legislative amendments reflect this sort of evolution, that I think we have learned that drug crimes can't be treated the same way as other crimes, and that people who have an addiction need help. And so there has been a change in attitude. There has been a change in the way these types of crimes are handled, and the way how we punish, or the sentences that are imposed. I have seen really effective approaches to people who have addictions and are in the criminal justice system by way of problem-solving courts. I am a fan of problem-solving courts, not just in the drug area, but in particular in the drug area, they have, I think, been effective. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to offer it to more people, to all the people who perhaps could benefit from being in a problem-solving court. So in a problem-solving court, you spend more time on each case, and you have a group of professionals who get together and try to come up with the best way to help someone who is facing criminal charges. And so rather than just having the judge interacting with the defendant and perhaps the defendant's lawyer and the prosecutor, you've got the probation officer, you've got a treatment provider, you've got other professionals, and you're trying to help this person get to a place where they're no longer dominated, or their lives are no longer dominated by their addiction. And again, unfortunately, we don't have the resources to be able to offer it to more people. But I would say that's a trend that I've noticed, a change that I've noticed during my time that I've been involved with the criminal law.
Elise?
In the journalism world, we've been having a really interesting conversation over the past 5 or 6 years about the right to be forgotten and how we frame our public safety coverage. 15 years ago, and still today, and depending on the market, you would write a police blotter, right? You would say, Bob Jones got arrested last night for DUI. Charlotte got arrested for breaking and entering. You'd have all these people in the paper. Maybe their names would go online. That would be there forever. They resolve their case. They go on in their lives, try to get a job, Google their name, that still pops up. So we've been having a really serious conversation, I think, in the industry as a whole about how we handle those cases. What do we actually need to cover versus what can we let go? Like if there was a robbery on Colfax last night, like what does it tell our readers? We just cover that robbery and let it be. Does it help them understand their city more, or would it be more helpful to kind of cover the broader trends here? Are there a lot of banks getting robbed in Denver? I don't know, like the broader pieces have become more important over the last 5 or 6 years. And that's kind of the frame that I try to bring to my work instead of covering every little thing that happens. Because it can also just blow things out of proportion, right? If all you read in the paper is robbery, murder, robbery, murder, robbery, murder, you're gonna feel unsafe in your community. But when you look at the larger trends, that's where you can really get the context that you need to understand what's going on. The Denver Post recently in the past couple of years you can appeal like a story, basically. Like if we wrote a story about you 10 years ago about getting arrested, and you resolve that case and you've gone about your life and have figured it out, and you're like, hey, this is really holding me back. You can email us, and we have a little panel of people that sits in and says, okay, can we take this person's name out of the online article? How can we help them move on with their life? Like, do we need to have them still named as a criminal? And I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially in the age of the internet, where everything is searchable and your Google name search matters.
Thank you. That's fascinating. I never thought about that. You have to wonder what's going to happen if your name is searched. But let's move on to Armando.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As I was pondering this question, I thought back on the years of service I've spent in public safety. And I started as a uniformed cop in the 1990s, early 90s. And I looked at, what has really been that emerging trend? What do I deal with today? And then I looked at my calendar, and a lot of my time now is spent on alternative response. And that is something that I see not only taking shape now, but really emerging across our country in a different way that we respond and police respond, and just public safety elements respond to historical calls for service. It used to be you called 911, a cop's getting dispatched no matter what the information was on the call. Now, and what was really an impetus for it was community involvement, community voice, particularly around people in mental health crisis. And folks, and there were negative outcomes, and you could look in the news and see the negative outcomes when police were dispatched to a mental health crisis. And we learned from that, and we've learned that you don't need to send a cop to every type of call. And in fact, here in Denver, we modeled a program based off the CAHOOTS model in Eugene, Oregon, where a mental health clinician was sent out instead of police. And we have our STAR program here, which has been a resounding success. And what we've learned from that, we started out in a pilot phase, and what we've learned from that is we can continue to grow and continue to respond to more calls, not sending a police officer, but sending a mental health clinician and paramedic, and really treat that public health issue around mental illness crisis, substance misuse, rather than having a criminal justice outcome for that. We're getting better outcomes, we're having better responses, and it is freeing up our police to then respond to violent crime and those crimes where they really need to be that first response.
Okay, thank you very much. And Jonathan? I can go back to the question.
Yeah, please.
Because since you're at the end, but I'm talking about changes and trends, and it's amazing how many things are happening with a lack of resources, is what I've heard so far as I weave together some of these threads. So I'm going to put it on you now.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you for recapping that. I got caught up in all the other answers, and I heard a lot of great information, and my mind tends to wander sometimes. But to bring that all together, one of the trends that I am pleased to see is, and I heard it with all of the answers, is that society in general is starting to look at the human condition and why people are committing crimes and what are the collateral consequences of those, right? I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up as a Black man in the 80s and 90s, where there was a narrative about what it meant to be young Black male in America. It meant we were an endangered species, less likely to graduate from high school, more likely to go to prison than college, more likely to die before the age of 25, more likely to not be around to raise our children. And that narrative that was painted created a narrative that I and thousands of others in Colorado and across the country felt like there was a script we had to follow, right? And the system facilitated us following that script. And by the age of 25, guess where I was? I was in the Department of Corrections. I'm DOC number 99223, right? I could start my story there or end my story there. But the fact of the matter is, because there's so many people who are within the system that are committed to true systemic and institutional change, my story didn't end at my number or me being a statistic of recidivism. I'm now the director of the state agency of Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which intentionally is not housed within the Department of Public Safety, but within the Department of Public Health. And so, as the Justice alluded to, mental health or drug addiction and drug crimes are not something that someone just wakes up and says, hey, I want to get high today and commit a crime. They're usually using because they're self-medicating, right? And they're self-medicating because of so many of what we would call social determinants of health have failed that person. They have not been available to that person. And so they have resorted to crime. They have resorted to a trauma response. And they have resorted to whatever they feel are the best means available to them to succeed in that moment, not even that day, that moment, right? And it may end up with being a crime. And now that we have a system that's starting to acknowledge that, we're able to give the right services, the right level of service at the right time, and hopefully either prevent a person from spiraling into the system, or once they're in the system, getting them out as quickly as possible. Now, that's a trend that started. The other trend that I'm noticing is that, unfortunately, we're also reverting back to what we saw in the early 90s, where high crime means, oh, we need more police. We need harsher laws that are going to keep our communities safe. We need to be tough on crime. And it's an easy narrative to fall into, but I believe everybody up here will agree with me. You're not going to be able to arrest or incarcerate yourself out of violent crime. It's just not going to happen. We need to make sure that we're focused on the human condition that is creating the circumstances that people commit crimes, especially violent crimes, to themselves or others.
Jonathan, thank you very much. And I'll carry that human condition idea with me as I go back to my classes this semester. So I'm now going to ask the hard question. Perhaps it might be easy, but given what we've talked about so far, but it appears that, especially in the United States, that the crime is increasing starting in the early 70s. And then, of course, that's 50 years ago when we think about our celebration of the school. I don't know that crime is celebrating, but until about the late 1990s. And there were many things. We also saw incarceration rates mushroomed as we put more and more people in prison. But then we started to see crime starting to fall off. So, which is typical with this, is kind of up and down, depending on sometimes mandatory sentencing. So I'll move on, but now we're seeing this, what we think is a short term, and we hope is a short term increase since COVID. And I present that with a lot of caveats, because crime and why it occurs is so complex. And we have to think about the media, which we have represented here, the types of crime. Are we talking about violent crime? Are we talking about property crimes, the location, and of course, sentencing can make a difference, especially if it's at the mandatory sentencing. So given your areas of expertise, I know that was a long one, but you were prepared for it, I think. How do we respond in a meaningful way that will show that we can keep crime from increasing and be safe in our community? I added just a little bit there because I think it's so important that we're safe in our community. And Jonathan, I'm going to ask you, if you're not worn out, to go ahead and we'll start at your end and come back this way. How's that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Well, I guess this is a continuation of what I was just saying. I'm so happy to see Kim Howard here today. She's the new chief of probation, juvenile probation for Denver. And I think about a program that's sort of housed in juvenile probation, like hand-down intervention program, right? So for the last several years, we've seen a alarming increase of young people who have been arrested with firearms, right? And if we even just look back on this past weekend, just yesterday, matter of fact, there was a young person in Aurora who apparently shot an officer and then ended up taking their own lives in their apartment, right? We cannot continue to allow that to happen. It does not keep our young people safe, doesn't keep our communities safe, and it's a danger to everyone. But programs like the HIP program look at what have we done thus far, what's working and what's not working. And it's really innovative in the sense of you have the wraparound services. When a young person is arrested for a firearm crime or possession, there's intensive case management that goes into supporting that young person's success from that moment on, right? And it's not just that young person, it's a two-gen approach. So we're looking at the family. What does mom need? What does mom need to be successful? We're looking at what's going on in school with this young person and bringing in the proper supports at school so that this child has an opportunity to be successful and see a path for themselves to success through an education lens. If we're looking at upward economic mobility opportunities, is mom looking for a job? Is this young person, is he or she interested in maybe a trade or some opportunity to make money this summer? but not only make money this summer, but being paired with an employer who is competent in what this young person, the background this young person goes to. And of course, because they have committed a crime and because they are now a part of the criminal legal system, they need to have some sort of supervision. Well, that supervision, thank you, Kim, and probation and diversion and all of our trained supervising agents, but maybe somebody from the community, person like me, or somebody like Kids Above Everything, or the STAR program, or any of these great programs in the community, finding a mentor from the community that this young person can relate to, and then be a mentor, a trained mentor to help this person get the life skills that they need in order to change the path that they're on and be able to visualize and recognize the opportunities that they have for themselves in a productive future. That to me is community policing. That's a public health approach to criminal justice. And it's a way to build, well, when we say reimagine policing, that's literally what it is.
Okay, thank you so much. Of course, I'll just a short plug for, that's why we also have excellent researchers at the School of Public Affairs who can help determine what works and what doesn't. Armando, do you have thoughts about that? I'm sure you have thoughts about this.
Absolutely, and I got to give Jonathan kudos for teeing it up for me, and really what I want to, he brought up exactly where I think we're going to be the most impactful from public safety, and that is taking a public health approach to public safety. Jonathan mentioned social determinants of health. He mentioned topics like recidivism, where we have folks, cycling in and out of our system. And ultimately, Jonathan's right. We're not public safety. We cannot arrest ourselves out of any of these crime problems, crime trends that we're seeing. What we're learning, though, and what we're seeing more is that a lot of our public safety issues are rooted in public health. Substance misuse, this opioid epidemic with fentanyl is unlike anything I've ever seen in my close to 30 years in the business. And I, with methamphetamines doing to people, how it's affecting young people, to see young people that are fentanyl addicted and then also turning to carry firearms and violence. We really need to do better about how are we servicing folks and providing public health needs. A lot of our problems, and a lot of the repeat offenders that we see cycling through our system, we've never taken the time as a system, or we've never invested in that person's underlying public health issues. And when we can start doing that more, and we're starting now, but we need to do more, and we need to have more investment. It's not just about investing in police, it's investing in all the other supportive services. Carol Peoples and I were just talking this morning about housing. Housing's huge in this regard. To get people, stable housing is going to help overall with crime. We've seen it in an Urban Institute partnered with the city with the social impact bond. We saw a great reduction in jail bed days for folks that were experiencing homelessness, that we got into stable housing. And so I really think that that's where, the Department of Safety, our police departments, from, the fact that we have so many co-responders, mental health clinicians that ride with our police officers. When we go out, and it is encouraging to hear cops coming to me and telling me, hey, I wanted somewhere else to take someone other than the jail. Because if I'm arresting someone for, causing a scene or disturbance in front of the Starbucks on 16th Street Mall, taking them to the jail where they're just going to process out in a few hours and probably return right back out to that condition, still be, dealing with their substance misuse or addiction or their untreated mental illness. That's not going to help this person. And ultimately, it's not making the community any safer. So I think really us concentrating more on that public health side of things, trying to get interventions. So in public safety, we are setting up a diversion center where we're really hoping to bring in a lot of services to treat people and to give officers another place to take people to, as opposed to the downtown detention center.
Thank you very much. And I will notice that Carol Peoples is feet on the ground running a program called Remerge for I think for parolees and probation. anyone that needs help. It's, we're very quite proud of our alumni there. Thank you. Elise, this is really interesting to me to see what your comments will be since you had done so much data analysis when we had talked. And I don't, was that a year ago
Oh,
on the
don't even
trends?
know.
I don't even
I
remember
think it was
either.
the spring. Yeah. I think from the news media perspective, our job and what we have kind of historically failed to do is a lot of people don't know how the criminal justice system actually functions. They don't know what is probation versus parole, what's diversion, like what does the court process actually look like, right? Like if I were gonna go talk to my friends and be like, hey, explain what happens after you get arrested. Tell me, like walk me through that process. Like, I don't know, I've seen like Law and Order, and I guess that's probably something like it, right? But that's not how it works at all. It's a lengthy, complex process with so many branches that come off of it. And I think that we could do a better job explaining how this all works. And kind of on that same page, it's when I did that reporting that Mary's talking about, I tried to pull apart exactly what kind of crime was rising and where, because it's so easy, especially in election season, for people to be like, crime. And like serious crimes are up, like it is a problem. The increase in violence is very real. But where is that happening? What does it look like community to community? You know, if we're having a significant rise in gun violence here in Denver, is it happening in Aurora? Yes. Is it happening in Boulder? Also yes, but like to a different degree because every community is different. So I learned a lot kind of pulling apart those trends and looking at different crimes, right? Like aggravated assaults, which are most of your shootings, non-fatal shootings, are way up, but you know, some other crimes weren't. So what does that tell us? It's not that people are going on some like crazy crime binge here. It was like certain things and what can we pull apart from that? I think that's way more helpful than just repeating politicians' random facts or stats that they pull out.
Hopefully.
To make whatever point they're trying to make. And I think that's kind of where we need to go in the news media. It's our job to educate the public, right? It's not the police department's job to explain how all this works. It's our job, part of our job to do that. I don't know, maybe I should start running an info bar next to all of my stories. It's like, here's how it works actually, like here's the process. It takes like 3 years from arrest to sentencing, and then there's more after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see the info bar, and I always frustrated when they mix up jail and prisons.
Yes.
Quite different places.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
thank you. That's a pet peeve, as my students know. They know better than to do that. So let me ask you, Carlos, where do you see, and what have you seen? You've had a lot of experience as a prosecutor and a judge and justice, and
You know, I think that trying to figure out why the crime rate is up is a complex question. I think that there are a lot of factors that go into it. And so, for example, you heard about fentanyl. That is a huge problem right now. There are a lot of people addicted to fentanyl. There are a lot of people who are dealing fentanyl. So that's a big problem area. You heard COVID. We all know about COVID. COVID's another factor, right? A lot of people lost their jobs during COVID. The economy is bad right now. That's going to make property crimes go up, right? Because people are struggling. People need to find a way to get by. But even beyond financial issues, you know, COVID affected people mentally as well, emotionally, psychologically, right? And so some people are having a hard time transitioning back to normal life, to normalcy. So that's an issue. One thing that I've noticed is that mental health is a big issue in the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, the courts are ill-equipped to deal with mental health issues. And it's something that comes up with frequency. You know, judges are not properly trained to identify mental health. And, you know, sometimes you're dealing with a defendant and the judge fails to realize this isn't a defendant who's just angry or being disrespectful. They have a mental health problem, right? They have a mental health condition. And if you don't identify that, if you don't figure that out, then you're going to get nowhere and you're going to make matters worse. Even if you identify it, then what do you do about it, right? That's another issue. And it's quite pervasive, actually. I think you heard earlier, somebody mentioned that we are trying to do better at responding, not just with police officers, but with other professionals. And I think that's a great idea. I think that there are times when what's required, it's not just a police officer, but a police officer and maybe a mental health professional, somebody who has the expertise to say, all right, this person doesn't belong in jail. Taking them to jail is going to do you no good, because they're going to go to jail and they're going to be back out tomorrow, and they're going to be, you haven't solved anything. They're going to be back to doing the same thing. And so we need to do better at figuring out how we can help people who are suffering from mental health conditions, from mental health issues, who find themselves in the criminal justice system. How do we address them, and how do we help them? So that to me is a big problem, and it's a problem that keeps getting worse and worse over time. And I don't think we've figured out a way to effectively address it.
Well, okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna ask, and I'll start with Jonathan. What do you see? And I think you've listed some of these things that are imperatives for the media, courts, law enforcement, corrections that need to be addressed in the next 50 years. Is there a fear that we're going to go back to where there was a super predator, or that crimes, as Elise mentioned, so scared that crime has increased? What can we do looking forward? And I know that you listed a lot of things about the wraparound services, which is amazing, but what else would you think that we could do?
At the risk of sounding repetitive, we need to continue this trend of recognizing that public safety and public health are not interchangeable. They are integral to each other, right? When we talk about public safety, we have to recognize the factors that contribute to a person making our communities unsafe. Recognizing that education, upward economic mobility opportunities, housing, food security, opportunities for equitable education, all of these things, when applied appropriately or supplied appropriately by our government institutions, will inherently create safer communities, right? That is what public safety is. That's what public health is. I'll be very honest with you. I'm very nervous about what's going to happen on Tuesday. And I'm very nervous about what's going to happen in 2 years from now, because we have people who are running on platforms that America is an unsafe place, our communities are unsafe, and it's because one side did one thing or didn't do another thing. And we run the risk of, as you mentioned, finding ourselves back where we were in the early 90s, well, throughout the 90s, and creating a space where we're othering people and then looking to put those others incarcerate those others. And then that creates another cycle, because then you are disenfranchising, disempowering, underinvesting into those communities, which then create the conditions where you don't have stability across all the social determinants of health that I talked about. And then you see a rise in crime, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20 years later, like we're seeing now. So we have to be very careful about the narrative that we're creating and fight back against. To Elise's point, a wide narrative of crime is rampant and not recognize that it's a very few that are committing the most violent crimes, and we can deal with those as appropriate, but we need to be very, very open about, I would say, dismantling the system as it is and re-examining how do we rebuild it.
Thank you. That was most interesting answer, and a little bit frightening. So we can handle
I don't mean
that.
to be the doom and gloom. I'll
We
leave that to
appreciate
Elise.
That's me, I'm the doom. I'm fun at
Armando,
parties.
can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, absolutely. And to pick up again on Jonathan's point of dismantling the system. So when I look at 50 years from now, what do we need to be at? I then look back at my, long tenure in policing, and I look back at where we were at in the early 90s around policing, around social justice, around equity, around the disparate outcomes that we all have heard, the war on drugs, on communities of color. Then I go to the summer of 2020, and how do I say that we've improved? I'd have said, in 2019, I would have said, yeah, we did. We have improved from when I first started as a cop to now, and how we administer public safety. But there's still disparate outcomes in our communities of color in the criminal justice system. And the murder of George Floyd brought that front and center again for our country. It showed we had not made the progress that we need to make. So when I look 50 years from now, I hope that this dismantlement of the system, looking things through through the social equity lens, that we are very intentional about now and are really working toward harder to, but we really need to improve our relationship from the law enforcement, public safety side to the community. We are getting there. When we reimagine policing, we reimagine public safety, we have to have community voice in that. Like I talked about with STAR, that was something that the impetus came from community. They wanted a different response. So this is really something that I think as we evolve into these next 50 years, and I think I'll be retired by then, but I hope I look back and that we've made the progress, particularly around disparate outcomes for our criminal justice system. And we're constantly making improvements, but we're still not there. One improvement recently was around reentry services, and not only reentry, but how we look at people that are arrested, but not yet convicted. And so there's a lot of conversation, a lot of politicalization around personal recognizance bonds, release while awaiting trial, those types of things, and offenders maybe that are committing crimes while on those types of release. And some of the narrative is, well, we need to have more secure bonds, or people need to remain in custody. And so there's this whole talk around that. But even that decision that a judge has in granting a person a bond or a personal recognizance release is based off information. It's based off information from a prosecutor, it's based off information from their defense attorney, but it's also based off information from their pretrial risk assessment. And one of the things we found in our pretrial risk assessment was, and we had an academic partner who helped us research this, the one that we use here in Colorado, the tool we use, is that it produced disparate outcomes on communities of color, meaning that someone that was white was more likely to get a PR bond or no bond than someone that was of color. So what we've done, and we've done fine tuning around this, and so we just started utilizing the revised risk assessment tool that's hopefully going to measure out against those disparate outcomes. So those are those advances we need to continue to make, but we need to have community's voice in that. And that's, I think, where we will need to be hopefully well before 50 years.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great. We're also, I mean, of course, journalism is changing. And I'm old, so I miss those days where you have your paper and you can do your crossword puzzle every morning. So it will be, I think, fascinating to see how it evolves, and especially the reporting of crime, as you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. But
speaking about bonds, there's something there, public education is
Yes.
how that works. When I look forward and I think about the things that I want to dig into and report on that I think are really important right now, it's a long list. You should see my Google Doc of story ideas here. But circling back to what Jonathan was talking about earlier, is young people with guns and the people affected by the young people who are doing the violence, the young people who are the victims of the violence, their friends. It just creates this whole circle of trauma. And as those kids grow up, or I shouldn't say kids, like these young people grow up, they're bringing that experience into their life. And like the increase in youth violence that we've seen is stark. It is up there. Jonathan and I have talked years
Long
ago, a
time.
long time ago, but it's gotten worse since then. So young people with guns, public safety system that has limited staffing. Armando and I have talked about this. Like, how do you run a effective and humane system when you can't staff your jails, you can't staff your police department, you can't staff your prisons, you can't staff your federal prisons, you can't staff, like we need workers to do that work. What happens if they no longer exist, as we're kind of seeing right now? That creates a fragile system where people are having to make difficult choices. I am, like everybody else, fentanyl, and also what comes after fentanyl, and where we're going to be 10 years from now in the synthetic opioids. That's concerning. How do we help people who are so far in addiction? Like, clearly our systems do not work, right? It's still a problem. It's been a problem for decades. What do we need to change? What does that change look like? And I had one more, but I forgot it. It's gone. I'll let it go.
If it comes back to you, just let us know,
Okay,
okay?
okay.
That'd be great. Carlos, do you have ideas about this? Obviously, yes.
Yeah, I will echo what's been said. I think we need to continue to try to improve, our approach to criminal justice. It isn't as simple as you get arrested, you've been found guilty, now you're put in prison, and even before you get into the court system, right? Just in terms of the police response, as I mentioned before, there are times when what you need is not somebody to get arrested, but somebody who needs to get help with their mental health issues, or maybe their addiction issues. Beyond that, I mentioned the problem-solving courts. Again, I'm a big fan. I mean, I think we're onto something with the problem-solving courts. I just think we have to find a way to make them available to a lot more people than we're making them available right now. It's a very small population right now that can take advantage of problem-solving courts, and it's a huge population, I think, that could benefit from them. You heard about bonds. I think, educating the public not only about bonds, but other aspects of the criminal justice system. I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that if the public is going to have a say in how we improve, they got to understand how we work first, right? And bond is a really difficult thing. Having been there as a trial court judge, essentially you're being asked to predict the future. Is this someone who's likely to go out and commit another crime while they're awaiting trial? Or are there ways that we can keep the community safe, or keep somebody in particular safe while this person is out on bond awaiting trial? Is this someone who's likely to flee the jurisdiction and not come back to court, right? Those are all very difficult determinations for a judge. And what goes through your mind as you're making these decisions is, great, this person is going to go out, kill someone, and then my name's going to be in the paper, front of the paper, right? Judge Samour allowed this defendant to go out, and now he went and killed someone. He gave him a personal recognizance bond. And it's interesting to me that about 4 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, there was a big push about how too many people were being kept in custody awaiting trial. And they were right. But now there's criticism that judges are giving too many PR bonds, personal recognizance bonds, right? So judges now are letting too many people go out. And so it just goes to show you how difficult that balance is, and striking that balance is. And there's going to be criticism either way. If you're keeping too many people in custody while they're awaiting trial, that's bad. That's not a good thing. But if you're letting some people out that are going out and hurting other people, seriously hurting them or killing them, committing serious crimes, that's not good either. And so where is the answer, right? Where's the line? Where do you draw the line? And trying to figure that out, it's hard. We have retrial services programs that provide reports. As indicated, we've learned that some of them are not as good as we thought they were, or perhaps they're biased in ways that were not intended. And so we're trying to address that. But again, we got to keep working at it, right? To try to get better in all these areas.
Justice, if I may, just follow up with
Yeah.
that. And Lise, I think you could back me on this. It's funny, like you said, about 4 years ago, there was a large outcry about how many people were not being released and they were in custody until they met trial. And now the pendulum has swung to the other way. It's always interesting to me that the small percent of people who go out, who are released on a PR bond and go out and commit a violent crime is almost minuscule, right? But the argument is we need to get rid of PR bonds and keep everybody locked up. Thousands and thousands of people probably weekly, right? Who are released or who are arrested and deserve a chance to get back out, to continue their jobs, not lose their house, continue to go to school, have an opportunity to redeem themselves and restore the harm that they've committed. But the narrative is, oh, these PR bonds, people are going to die, right? And it's such a small fraction of people who are released on a PR bond that go out to reoffend in general, but especially a violent crime.
But all it takes is one, right?
All it takes is one.
Because one goes out and that's what gets, that's what makes the news.
Tony Kovaleski will be at your door.
That's right. That's
Right, exactly.
So all it takes is one, and that's what's so hard about it. But as you mentioned, I mean, these are folks who are presumed innocent. They are presumed innocent, right? If we really believe that, if that's true, and that's what our system is based on, presumption of innocence, then they shouldn't be in custody pending trial. They should be out, and as you said, if you keep them in custody, then they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their house, they're going to lose their family. There's a cascading effect that has. You're going to make matters worse. And so, but figuring that out, right? How do you keep the community safe or a particular victim safe, while at the same time giving effect to the presumption of innocence? That is very difficult. But that's something that we need to continue to struggle to try to figure out, because that's part of our system.
Well, and the bond is interesting too, because the flip side of that is what doesn't get reported is if someone is out on a high bond and then does more crime.
Right.
It doesn't become a story about bond, it's just a story about the crime. Like the quadruple homicide we had in Aurora this past weekend, the domestic violence, the guy was out on $100,000 bond. But the story isn't guy out on $100,000 bond does crime, right? It's part of it, right? If he had been on a PR bond, it would have been a different ball.
Yeah, and remember that the goal of a bond is not to keep somebody in custody, right? So as a judge, if you're just trying to come up with a figure that's so high that this person is not going to make it, that's not the purpose of bond. So
right.
So there's that too. It's not again, that's just one aspect of our system, and it's not easy. None of these questions are easy, but they require, I think, a lot of work, and they require us to continue to try to figure them out and to get better, because that's the only way that things are going to improve.
We need a whole panel on bonds, apparently.
Okay, that will be our next panel. That's interesting. We have lots of great questions. We don't have a lot of time, but there's one, I believe probably one of my students wrote. It certainly sounds like something I would teach them, but, and this could go to my chief's laughing, but yes, this could go to anyone, and particularly maybe Jonathan has answered this one in a little bit. But in your opinions, do you believe that America's underlying and changing culture is contributing to this increase in criminogenic traits among community members? That clearly sounds like one of my students.
You know what? I'm going to pass.
I don't blame you. That's a tough one.
I could answer if I went director.
Jonathan, and the reason I pulled your name out of the hat was that you had mentioned that there's some trepidation about the upcoming elections, which may have some underlying consequences for what this question is asking. Is there anybody else that, and I'm not putting you on the spot, Jonathan.
No, I appreciate the question. I'll keep my answer very brief. Is today's climate contributing to an increase in criminogenic behavior? Is that how I understand it?
Yes.
Short answer, I would say yes, absolutely. But there's multiple factors. I'm gonna go do something. Oops, sorry. Oops, I think I broke the mic. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. Some of this personal to me, as you see, I'm not traditional in my for the director. I love hip hop, grew up with hip hop. I listen to it on my car on the way here. A couple of days ago, one of the young uprising hip hop artists that the kids are listening, my kids are listening to, was killed in Houston at a dice game of all places. Right? That's probably I would say at least the 5th high profile hip hop artist that was killed in the last year. There's been a almost normalcy within like the hip hop culture, hip hop generation, that depth is hand in hand and part and parcel of being a young person of color in America, right? And that's traumatizing. And when you grow up with this mentality of violence is part of my culture, in order to be part of my culture, I have to be prepared to either be the victim or the perpetrator of violence in order to survive. Well, not victim, but it creates a dangerous narrative that then explodes into crime being experienced, being reported on, whether by a mainstream publication like the local newspaper or on blogs or online, and then it's shared across social media channels, repeated ad nauseum, to the point that young people feel as though they need to carry a firearm to protect themselves. I promise I'll be there. Then when a young person has a firearm, they do not have the emotional intelligence to use that firearm responsibly. Crime then happens. And so it becomes a spiraling effect. Makes the news, and people who are not necessarily in that subculture feels like, oh, I need to go. I need to protect myself, and so they go out and buy firearms, right? Now you have a person who probably is never going to use that firearm, and you know why. So they buy the firearm, they put it in the nightstand, or they leave it in the car, or they put it somewhere where they think they hid it. Well, what happens if that car gets stolen? The car gets stolen. That firearm is now on the street, right? And that perpetuates even more violence. We now have another firearm in the hands of somebody who is prone to act on criminal justice. And they're involved in a culture that has normalized violence in American. So yes, that was a very long answer.
But it was a wonderful answer. Thank you so much for taking that on. I'm going to leave this question a little bit open too. And how can we increase public support for less punitive criminal justice sanctions? For example, the bond has come up, but especially in times where we have, we think, a high level of fear of crime. And perhaps this is a journalistic question, but how can we make the public feel safe? And maybe you do feel safe, but I watched Next Door. Is that what it's called? I'm actually doing a research study right now on Next Door.
Oh, fascinating.
Yes, it's going to be great. And you get this sense overall that people feel quite unsafe in our community, which is for all of us, what we want to do is make sure that they feel safe. And Justice Moore, you may have some comments about this one too.
I don't,
You go.
okay. I don't know the answer. I don't know what the solution is, but I do think that, you look at the Gallup polling and crime goes like this, right, over the decade, kind of up and down, up and down. But the public perception or the public fear of crime goes up pretty steadily, like over the past couple decades. So the reality doesn't necessarily matter. It's just people are afraid, and you can pin that on all kinds of different things. The news media definitely plays a part, can play a part. As I think the Next Door question is fascinating. Like people post in this app about porch pirates or, whatever it may be in your neighborhood. And it just seems, and everyone's posting that. And it's all you see. I live in Northwest Denver. Like we don't have shootings in my neighborhood, but you talk to people at the little neighborhood potluck and people are like, oh my God, crime's so bad. Tell me more about that. Like, why do you think that? Because your bike got stolen out of your unlocked garage? Like, that's not great. No one wants their bike stolen, but like, I feel that just the constant barrage of stuff, not just from the news media now, because now it's coming from Facebook and it's coming from Twitter and it's coming from Nextdoor and whatever the Ring app is called. It just kind of creates this constant feeling of fear, which is not healthy. I feel like our brains we're not conditioned to input all that and think about it in a rational way. I don't know what the solution is, but that's part of the problem.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah,
interesting
I
question.
have to say, yeah, I have to echo that. I mean, I think that we live in an era now where information gets disseminated so quickly, and you're getting it from so many places. And it's not just media. I mean, we definitely get plenty of media now, exposure to media, right? Internet, you name it, right? Social media, you get a lot. And so you are getting bombarded with all this information. And, I think whether we like it or not, that kind of affects the way you think about things. But also, just people posting things. I mean, that's happening a lot. And, is it reliable? Anymore, right? It's like who can report something first. And so it's a race to who's first. And, you can check later to see if it's really, really accurate or completely accurate, right? You can always correct it, but are you going to be the first to report it? I think that's part of it. I think that's part of what's going on. And I think, I don't have the answer either, but I think one thing is, I think we have to educate ourselves more about these things and be more aware of this phenomenon, so that we take things with a grain of salt, so that we learn to maybe check, sources and not just take things at face value. And maybe the other thing I would say is transparency, right? Because people don't trust what they don't see. And so if you don't know how the justice system works because you don't see it, then you're not going to trust it. So I'm a big proponent of transparency. What if you were able to, and I'm not saying that there should be a camera in every courtroom, but what if there was more transparency about how the system works, what judges do? People right now, I think, are feeling very cynical about the government, including courts, including the police department, right? And I think some of that is because, you don't see how it works. You don't see what they do. So transparency would be something that I would suggest might help.
Well, I think it's also interesting, Denver, for all the doom and gloom about the news media here in Denver and how it's shrinking, and it's actually like fairly healthy. Like we have several TV stations that do good work. We have multiple news outlets going on here. And like so many communities across the country, there's just really no news source anymore. There's no news outlet. There's no trained journalists doing this work and having these kind of thoughts who have been trained to think about the broader picture here. I worked in Casper, Wyoming before I came here. They still have a paper, but it's shrinking. I think they have 4 reporters left, and they cover the whole state. And what fills the void is random Facebook pages where people are just posting whatever, and there's no verification, there's no fact check, or you get these news outlets that are just blogs and they just write arrest reports, and that's it. That's all they do, because people are interested in the arrest reports and they will read it. And it's like low level of work for high yield. And they just churn this stuff out. But there's no follow-up, there's no fact check, there's just none of that. So it's when we don't have news media, it doesn't get better. Just something fills the void and may or may not be a better choice.
So many people nowadays play opinion entertainment with factual.
That's a great point, Jonathan. Yeah, that's a great point. Because in the old days, right, you were not allowed to provide your opinion, if you were doing news media. And now that's what we all seem to enjoy the most. It's like, we don't want to hear the facts, we want opinion,
We want Andy Rooney.
Not all of us know Andy Rooney. Yes, you do. So we have just a couple of minutes and lots of great questions, but one of the things that Carlos, you mentioned, and I want to address the entire panel for this one. How do we develop transparency and trust? Those two words continue to come out more and more. So for example, I know with the courts, they have our courts where judges and lawyers go out to the community. And it gets, has anybody in the room heard of our courts? It's a wonderful program. My students and of course Judge Hawthorne presents, but those kind of things, how do we get the community involved and we offer this transparency and trust, particularly, and this may go to Armando a lot, but policing is, it's certainly something that needs to be addressed. I didn't want to say it was a problem, but
Nope,
it's
nope.
not a problem, but there are things that we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that is one of our biggest challenges right now. And I think it even goes towards the problem we're having hiring folks to want to join the profession, right? It's people don't trust the police. There's the relationship with police and community. While in some places may have gotten better, it's not where it should be. One of the ways that we try to balance it from my department and the departments of police, fire, sheriff, is we try to achieve that transparency that the judge talked about, that we try to be transparent. However, it's a balance. I'll give one situation that was a very high profile, still a high profile situation, and that was the shooting in Lodo, where we had an officer's bullet that caused harm to folks in Lodo. And balancing the transparency, balancing what we knew that the folks, people, the community, the public, the press, they wanted to see the body worn camera. They wanted to see the halo footage or the downtown camera footage of it. They wanted to hear all these things. But then we also have to balance the needs and the rights of a criminal justice prosecution, an investigation, and then the victims. And there's so much of this. So it's really hard when in fact, the public perception may be we're hiding something or we're not. We're sitting there behind trying to balance all the things that we need to balance, right? Is the DA, gonna want to do this? Is the defense attorney gonna have objection to having this body cam? Because ultimately we're trying to preserve the rights for that person that may be going to trial for this, right? So it's a real difficult balancing act to be very transparent, but then also preserve the rights that are within our system, particularly around victims and around victims' rights. So that is really hard. It's something that we balance a lot at. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. We have to be able to, from the law enforcement side, public safety side, we have to be engaged with the community. And what I learned quickly in the George Floyd and the aftermath of the George Floyd and the conversation I was having with community is I had to listen. Right? I couldn't go in there and whatever forum I was on and try to talk I needed to listen to people's concerns because people have very real perceptions about what happened and some may be skewed by misinformation or things like that, but I needed to listen. And I think more and more law enforcement can do well at going into the community and listening, not telling them what's going to make them safer, but listening to the community. And I think that's going to be, and as we do that, and as I participated in forums, when I found that we can listen more, the police officers that are on, that are presenting, listen to the community, I think we get further along in creating that trust.
It's wonderful. We have just a few minutes. So
I think there's a question.
yes, sir, you again, and there's a question that we would definitely want to take. Yes, Provost.
Right, I'll help you.
Thank you. Made me look good.
Thank you for the opportunity and the privilege to ask a question. But I want to start with a statement which acknowledges the theme that I'm hearing here, which is the trends that you all highlighted. And I want to believe that society is really drifting in the direction that you all highlighted, which is take the human being and give opportunities, benefit of the doubt, and so on, right? Which is not typically what we associate policing and criminal justice systems. First comment is that one of the jewels that I've discovered about Steve is this mindset of giving second chances. We have an education in the prisons where inmates, I think they have a different term for that, but the people who are serving sentences have the opportunity to pursue it. At this point, this is it's coming out of our communication. And the person who is spearheading this, some of you probably know about that, is also organizing statewide to have community colleges and other universities participate in this program. I think you have to go on. Right. I think this is the opportunity where education becomes the rehabilitation need for somebody to bring second chance of being productive in our society. And it sounds to me like, anyone can make a mistake and needs to be punished for the mistake. But for that mistake not to haunt them their entire life, which is when I heard about Denver Post giving the chance to take somebody's name out of the story after they have done their time, sounds to me like the right thing to do, right? So that's yet again in the sense of giving second chances. And my question is, how can we, in terms of kind of forming a coalition of like-minded second chance opportunity people, influence our state leadership and the criminal justice system to support programs of this where we are not just punishing, but we're giving them a chance to be rehabilitated, to return to society, and to participate in society.
If I may, test. Yes, to all of that. And I'm going to start my statement with saying, vote Tuesday. AG Weiser has started an incredible program out of the Attorney General's office. It's called the Fair Chance. Carol, help me with this. Carol. Fair Chance Hiring Coalition, where he's engaged stakeholders from all across the state to help develop essentially a network of employers who are willing to invest in the opportunity for people who are leaving incarceration, whether it's at the state level or the local jurisdictions, to have an employment opportunity. That goes all the way from understanding what the background check looks like. Because oftentimes when a person goes through a background check, it shows the crime, but it doesn't necessarily give context to why this person was incarcerated, how long ago, all of these different factors that would go into an educated hiring decision. But then also making sure that these employers are informed of what it takes and what additional supports a person who is formerly incarcerated may need to be a successful employee. Understanding that there are system obstacles that they need to navigate, like parole and curfew and certain places where they can and cannot travel to. So it's all about creating a system that is favorable to a successful employment post incarceration. I would love to see that expanded to your question or your statement. If we could expand that to housing opportunities, right? If we could expand that to education opportunities, and not just looking at second or higher ed, but looking at certificate programs and trade programs that we know the tech industry isn't going anywhere, right? And we all agree that tech is going to be our future, is our future. Making sure that people who are post-incarcerated are prepared to move into those industries. All the way from maybe customer service to supply to sales to even entrepreneurship, where they can develop and establish their own companies and then contribute to the larger economy of America. So there's a foundation that's already been established in Colorado. We just need to continue to scale it and pull in like-minded partners. And then I look at my friend Carol over here. She's the expert in this space.
What,
John, can I just put in a plug for something you just started? We got it this summer, the Fair Chance Housing Coalition in Colorado. We're just getting that off the ground. So I'd love to.
one thing I'd like to.
We need to put Carol on a panel too.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd like to quickly add, and thank you, Provost, for that statement. I definitely agree that education is a big part of reducing recidivism. I mean, that second chance when folks can get an education in custody or upon their release, it's really helpful in them not re-entering the criminal justice system. But I want to talk about a good point there you made is those folks that are getting a second chance now have a lived experience. They have an experience in the criminal justice system. And I've seen the involvement, and I've been part of that in our public safety department in offering folks that have maybe something that would have been prohibitive for them to get employment in a criminal justice space are now allowed to come to our space. And Elise was at our Project Elevate. It's a female halfway house environment that we have. And we have folks with lived experience that with a criminal record that have now had a second chance. They've navigated themselves through the system and are now helping others that were in their experience, that are experiencing the same things, addiction, recovery, and all those things. So this is really an opportunity to get folks involved and have successful second chances.
I think I was one of the first people with a felony to work for the Department of Safety with Denver.
Well, it's going to be. So this is a difficult thing for me to do, but we are past 10 o'clock. Just a little bit, so I understand that people have schedules and things to do. And if you'd like to stay around and talk, we'd love that. Any of our panelists can stay. Jonathan, will put you in my office for your. You're good? We can talk. But I'd like to end on a positive note. I think what the panel shows today is that we have people out there and in the audience that care and are doing everything that we can to help the criminal justice system, criminal justice / legal system, and it will make a difference ultimately. I'm ever hopeful and positive. Thank you for coming today.